Hello, Denny. Hello, Denny. Hello, Denny.
Hi, Pam. How you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for joining me at Gigi in the 561 today. Everyone, I have Denny S. Bryce. I am so happy to have you here. Now, you're coming to us from Savannah. Is that right?
That is correct. I am in the lovely state of Georgia, recently relocated from Northern Virginia. I moved down here to Savannah in August.
Oh, Savannah in August. That is, I have been to Savannah in August, and so I love Savannah. It's beautiful. And
it is gorgeous.
It really is.
Gorgeous.
But, you know, like being in Florida, it's the same thing in August in Florida. Same thing. So let me tell my listeners just a little bit about you, and there is a lot to say about you. So I will, throughout the podcast, we will unleash even more about your wonderful self. Denny S. Bryce is an award-winning author. Denny won the RWA Golden Heart and was a 3-time Golden Heart finalist, including twice for Wild Women and the Blues. She also writes book reviews for NPR Books and entertainment articles for Frolic Media. Denny writes historical fiction, and her debut novel, which we want to talk a lot about today, Wild Women in the Blues from Kensington Books, will be on sale on March 30th. You are a former dancer and public relations professional, and you spent over 2 decades. How's that possible? I've seen your photos. Running your marketing.
Makeup.
I hear you. And event management. You also wrote fan fiction, and I do want to talk about that because I'm very intrigued by that. And then once you stopped doing that, that's when you started writing your original work. Isn't that right?
That is absolutely correct. And again, thank you for having me. I'm very excited. This is one of my first interviews now that I am on the, virtual book tour train, as you will, for Wild Women in the Blues. And, but first, as you said, let me tell your listeners a little bit about my debut novel. Only took me, maybe 3 or 4 years to write and research, but that's what happens with debut novels. Wild Women in the Blues is what we call a dual storyline. It is set in Chicago in 1925 and in 2015. The 1925 story centers on a chorus girl in what was called the Black Belt, but I like to refer to the part of the city as Bronzeville, which it ultimately became known as. In the 2015 storyline, we are dealing with a grieving young film student who visits a woman at a senior's home who happens to be, in quotes, 110 years old. And so her story connects them in surprising ways, connects the 2 timelines in surprising ways, as does this young man who, Sawyer, and my main character, Honore. So that is Wild Women in the Blues. And you mentioned that my past life as a professional dancer. Well, part of the inspiration for Wild Women in the Blues actually dates back to my maternal grandmother, Ella Elizabeth Joseph. She passed away years ago, but she came to this country from Montego Bay, Jamaica in 1923. And I have all these photos and these early memories of her that, I just had this fascination with that decade because of her, because she was very fashionable in her time, and all the photos were still in the house. And yeah, so it's like, oh my, what's all that about? I was like 4 or 5 years old, but still I was mesmerized nonetheless.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I grew up and had this fascination with dance that came after being a gymnast in high school and all sorts of crazy stuff, this story just seemed to be a natural for me because I love the entertainment industry. I love telling stories, untold stories about Black entertainers, women who, from the Josephine Bakers to, which is a name people know about, but I also pretended to sing when I was in New York. I used to live in New York. So I pretended to sing and I pretended to act in addition to dancing. So it was like, okay, let me put all of my talents and actually make these people talented in my fiction. So that was me and inspiration. My grandmother, just because of the time period and the stories she would tell and the silence of my grandfather, who would never tell any stories. And so that sort of grew into some of the key male characters in the book who have a tendency not to say much until they're pressed.
I think that's such a man thing.
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
And also fun writing about a young man I feel he's definitely in romance they call him a beta character. Mm-hmm. My book is not romance, but it does have a love story floating through it, most definitely. But he's a guy who's in trouble. He's in emotional conflict, and he's but nonetheless he's trying to fight back, and his means of doing that is to finish something, and what he wants to finish is his thesis, and he's a film major, grad student, and so his focus is on Oscar Micheaux. Now, Oscar Micheaux, a name that may not be familiar to some of the folks in your audience, while others will be very familiar, was one of the first, if not the first, African-American filmmaker at the turn of the century, who had quite a number of films that he created. And with the lack of opportunity in Hollywood, if you will, mm-hmm. for Black filmmakers, he had to create his own environment. So he wrote, he produced, he tracked down locations, he found actors and had to sell his quote unquote, they were called race films. And
oh my!
In the at this time period, race films referred to African American films that starred and depicted African American actors, actresses, and stories. And many of these things happened as Oscar Micheaux's work. One of his earliest productions, in fact, was in response to a movie called, it came out in 1915. Oh my God, why am I forgetting?
This was before they were even talking, so this was still in the silent
these are
film.
Most definitely silent films. And this movie, I'm going to look it up. First film was really ever made. I don't think it was the first anything ever made. It was one of the earliest, but it was, thank God for computers, because I'm definitely in front of one, because my brain is a little blank on 1915 movie.
Gosh, I can't imagine why.
Well, yeah, it's just not always. Birth of a Nation, thank goodness.
Oh, Birth of a Nation. Oh, okay.
Right. Birth of a Nation was really film has always had, I was a theater and dance major in college, and I was also a film addict, especially classic films. And I was fortunate enough when I went to college outside of Chicago, and there was this old film house, so I saw many early films for the first time.
Oh, how wonderful!
On the big screen, everything you can imagine, all of the Hitchcock movies, even Gone with the Wind.
Huge classic movie buff myself. So that was
okay.
so yeah.
It was amazing. It was at the time, of course, I didn't know it was amazing.
Right, exactly.
I was young and just sort of bouncing around the world. But Birth of the Nation has a horrific history. It's one of the worst films ever made.
Yeah.
But it was also at the time one of the most influential films. Sadly influential, because it glorized, for lack of a better word, the Klan, and really presented African Americans as these horrible people. And so what Oscar Micheaux did was counter that sort of, now not that he had the same platform to communicate his films to the broadest possible audience, but he was able to get his films out there. So Oscar Micheaux was an important part. He is a part of my story, both in the past and in the present, storylines of Wild Women in the Blues. And in addition, one of the things that I really enjoyed doing and preparing and researching this book was I got to listen to a lot of blues singers. There was an album called Women in the Blues. I think it was just that simple of a title. And it was, how can I describe it? It had a chronological, list of blues singers dating back to 1923. So you had names like Ida Cox, Bessie Smith, Alberta Hunter, all of these gals, Ma Rainey. I mean, some of the folks that you're actually seeing in these films. Yeah. And, Ma Rainey was just on, I can't remember what cable outlet or whatever outlet it was on, but Viola Davis was a big part of that.
Absolutely.
Production. Yeah. So you can see you have to stop me because I can ramble.
No, I am not. I am not going to stop you. I am also, I'm right with you on the movies and and jazz. I mean, I grew up with some of the greats, with my dad, who had a huge record collection and love of music. I mean, it just doesn't get any better than Jimmy Reed. I mean, that was one of my dad's favorites. That's some of this is way in my playlist right now. It's just incredible, and I try to push that on out to young people. It's like you gotta drill down into real music. You have to know people like the great clarinetist Sidney Boucher. I want to call it Boucher. I always want to say it Boucher, but it's actually, I think the pronunciation is kind of like
I can't remember that one.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
Oh, yeah. Look him up. I'm going to send you the spelling of him because you are going to love his music. I'm sorry. Now I'm going off. Because you know what?
We've definitely found a common ground here because jazz and blues, well, music in general, as a dancer, as a former dancer, let me be specific, I was able to actually work professionally for almost a decade between Chicago and New York. Not in an illustrious way, but I was with some dance companies. But one of my earliest experiences was with the Cleveland Ballet, because I started in ballet, and dance gave me such a well-rounded appreciation of all forms of music.
Yeah.
So that was always that's always a connection point for me is sound. and rhythm and tunes and whatever orchestra music. Ravel's Bolero, for example, was like one of my favorites, and anything by Igor Stravinsky. So all of those.
I think if you're a dancer, because I have that also in common with you, as being a former dancer and that in college, and I don't know whether it was my family, especially my dad, with the music that he brought it into our world. The only genre that I and I say it freely on my podcast is country, that I just cannot. I just don't have an appreciation.
I appreciate the storytelling and lyrics of good country music, and still I feel strongly that the instruments used. I'm a guitar fan and a saxophone fan, and I used to work at a place in Chicago called the Wise Fools Pub. So I was in college maybe, so this is many years ago, or maybe not that long ago. Let me decide how old I am today.
It's not that long ago. Again, I've seen your pictures. So.
Just the other day. But as a young person, I was exposed to a lot of really star-level musicians, like people like bluegrass musicians and all of this stuff, Muddy Waters, Coco Taylor. And one of the characters that I encountered while working in New York, because as a dancer in New York, I was waiting tables. That's how you made money, really. Right. And the place that I was working was called the Cookery. And at the Cookery, our headliner was a gal named Alberta Hunter. And for those who read Wild Women in the Blues, you will see that name appears and actually that songwriter, singer, is in the book in some spots. I scattered
cool.
some people.
I love that.
Yeah, and I met her when she was in her 80s, and she was still performing.
You got to love that. I love that.
Oh, it was amazing. But again, at the time, I didn't know. I just knew that on the nights that this woman played, I made a lot of money in tips. And but I got to know her because my job on the nights that I worked, that she was working, was to bring her tea, because she always had tea before she performed. And she and I started talking about our mutual adopted hometown of Chicago. And so that's how I, just interacted with her over the months that I worked there and she worked there. So, again, these accidental run-ins with history have helped shape my appreciation of American history and African-American history.
Now, you were a history major in college, right?
I was a history minor. I was a history minor in college. Okay. I was a theater and dance major.
Got it.
But part of theater and dance, of course, is studying the history of theater and the history of dance, which coincides with everybody from Isadora Duncan to Catherine Dunham. Louis XIV's court. You can go on and on with how the entertainment industry has been a part of my, my thing, if you will. In addition to that, you mentioned fan fiction.
Right.
And I worked real hard as a public relations and marketing, like I like to call myself, diva. During those years, I was doing that thing. And the only relaxation that I could muster was to come home and write fanfic. And the show that I fell in love with, totally by accident, because it was already in its last season by the time I started watching it, was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Mm-hmm. And I really enjoyed the dialogue. I enjoyed the mythology, which I thought was just really strong. And so I just started hanging out on the internet and finding these people and these groups and where was I? Live Journal was where a lot of authors or writers of fanfic hung out in those days. So that's where I started writing a lot. And I wrote Buffy Spike for anybody fandom aware. I was not a Angel Buffy writer. Anybody who's out there who's listening, they're going, oh, okay, I understand. With this particular, what was I saying about? One of my friends in the fanfic world happened to be she was using a pen name online, as most people did back in the day, and she was in Romance Writers of America. Her name is Alicia Raisley. And Alicia, at the time, she was not Alicia Raisley. She was who used another name, but we had a conference, an actual fanfic writers conference in Las Vegas. We were in Las Vegas. And she said, you should try writing original fiction. And I was like, original, well, what? I'm just having fun. And she's like, no, come with me to this conference. And so that was my first introduction to original fiction, if you will, was attending a Romance Writers of America conference. Hung out in RWA land for almost a decade. And now I've, I guess it's been a couple of years since I pretty much decided that I was going to be writing historical fiction, not romance.
Well, I have only read your book. First of all, as I told you in my initial contact with you, the cover art is just outstanding. It is. Yeah. It is absolutely gorgeous. Wild Women and the Blues has the best cover that I've seen in ages. No, it already drew, to me, this is my personal opinion, just drew me right in. But then I have read the sneak peeks that's available about the book, and after reading only what is available right now, because the book isn't out yet, I told my husband, I said, just reading just this little bit, I can see you going places with that book. I mean, becoming, no, I mean it really, with the things that are the avenues that are out there with Netflix and Amazon Prime and all of this original content. Seriously, the concept of your book where you have two time periods colliding, and I think it's incredibly compelling. The way that
thank you.
No, I mean it. I really do mean that. I think that this book, I wish that I'm wishing it to happen, because I would. It is something I think needs to be seen, and this is solely based on this small little bit that I read.
Opening. Well, I hope you enjoy the entire book. I want to backpedal a minute, because people talk about this cover so often, and I want to make certain I share with you the talent behind that cover, because I didn't write it. I mean, I didn't draw it. I didn't do anything with it. I
love giving credit, so please do.
The Kensington Kensington Books creative director, Christine Mills Noble, and cover illustrator, Sarah Knott, are the two women behind the cover of Wild Women in the Blues. And it's, in fact, I'll tell a little story about how a certain scene in my book changed because of this cover. Yes, because it's a big scene in the book. I won't go into any spoilers.
No,
but it's a pretty pivotal scene later in the story. And she had on a different colored dress, and her pearls dropped in the front instead of the back. So I said, when I saw this cover, I was like, yes, okay, I have to change something.
So Excuse me while I make a little change.
Make a little adjustment on page, 200 or wherever it is. But I fell in love with it because the dancers, and you can usually spot a dancer by how they hold their back and their neck.
Yep.
And this did that, and just the fact of her profile showing her determination is what I saw in this visual. I just fell in love with the cover.
Me too. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, and from your lips to Hollywood's ears, we hope that there will be some. My agent has had a couple of inquiries, but that's something that happens, with books. I mean, the excitement. I am so honored and thrilled for the visibility that the book is receiving, the attention, the buzz. I mean, it really kicked off when we were on made Oprah magazine's list of most anticipated historical fiction.
Well, I hope everyone will really keep pushing hard, because I think this needs to see more visibility, and so I'm hoping that will come to fruition. I do want to talk just a brief moment. You talked about you wanted to give credit to the illustrators and the creators of this beautiful cover, but one thing that also I liked very much in doing my research on you, because I'm very, very big on this, and like you, when you were in Las Vegas, someone suggested to you should do this, and there was kind of a connection there. But one thing that I really liked, and I don't know if you're still doing it, but you have done it, is pitch wars. And while we're talking about pitching the book, and I was very, very pleased to see that in what I read. So help us understand, are you still doing that? And let's talk about that for a second.
Yes. Pitch wars, just to share with folks, it's a fantastic program created several years ago by a woman named Brenda Drake, an author by the name of Brenda Drake. And what it is, and it's gained so much credibility and attention and a lot of different things. What it is a group of volunteer mentors selected by a panel that Brenda pulls together, work or go through a selection process saying, here's the type of young author, unpublished, seeking traditional representation, we'd like to work with. And I've done this for 2 years. This past year, I worked with another author we were co-mentors, Elle Penelope, who is a fabulous fantasy author. And we have worked with a young lady, and agents read her stuff. She is amazing. She did get some requests. Her name is Kayla Coleman. And the Pitch Wars program is phenomenal. We had, I think, over 4,000 submissions, and we scale it down. There's different categories: adult, middle grade, YA, and it's just a marvelous program. I love it tremendously.
Now, is this, you would recommend this to young, but I get questions from young writers frequently, and they always want to know how to break through. And so this sounds like a really good start. How would they just go to the website and follow?
They should go to, first and foremost, you have the prerequisite for, and when I say young, I don't mean age. I just mean someone who's writing
unpublished, right?
Unpublished, and a young writer can, the gal who wrote Crawdads, for example, her first published book, and she did that at 70 something. Anyway, so you have to have a full manuscript.
Okay.
And completed in order to participate in.
You have to have the beginning, the middle, and the end.
The whole thing. But there are also, I like, there's another group out there that I think is very valuable is in prepping to get to that point. Savvy Authors.
Okay.
And if I had another recommendation on the tip of my tongue, it would probably, outside of savvy authors, I would say I love Margie Lawson. Margie Lawson has a website and just offers a battery of different classes that I've taken a lot with her in her immersion classes. But initially, I think savvy authors and I'd say Margie Lawson are two places I'd stop as a young writer, unpublished writer, who wants to get a look at honing their skills.
That's really great advice.
Yeah,
great advice.
And then Pitch Wars, get out there. And the thing about Pitch Wars is that some people, they also have these things on Twitter called pitch mads and things like that, where agents just look at pitches on Twitter.
Wow.
And say, say, ooh, that looks good. Send me that.
Who would have thought that?
Well, folks are pretty much into utilizing the various social media platforms.
Oh, well, don't we all? To the point of I'm not doing it anymore kind of thing.
Right.
Okay, so I don't
to the point
do
of
that anymore.
total distraction.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
Do a thing, So, yeah. But I love Pitch Wars. I strongly recommend it. It's a fabulous program.
I loved the fact that you're giving back in that way, because I just told someone yesterday, I said, we all need a lifeline. Sometimes we need a shoulder to stand on.
Yeah.
And when someone does that and then goes back, it just means the world to me. I think it's so, so important in life. But listen, before we wrap this up, is there anything that I have missed? And in closing, I want to read a couple of reviews of your marvelous, I know it's marvelous book, but is there anything that you want to add that we haven't touched on? You have been such a joy, and I want to invite you to come back after you get through with all of your touring, and because we need to have another podcast just about classic movies and jazz and music.
Oh, my goodness, yes. I could go
Will you promise to do that? Because I really want to do that.
Totally. I'd love that. That would be fantastic.
Awesome.
The only other thing that I would, let me think. Well, I have other books coming. I'm very excited that I have a book coming out next year. Right now it's tentatively slated to come out in April, called Blackbirds. It, again, is a dual storyline, and it's set in 1928 Los Angeles and in 1968. A road trip from Chicago to Los Angeles. I'm very excited about that book.
Oh, it sounds great.
And I also recently signed with William Morrow to write a book on Sarah Forbes Bonetta. Those who watched Queen Victoria, the movie, might have some knowledge of this young woman, of this girl. She was an African Egbato princess who was, and I put this in quotes, gifted to Queen Victoria as a child. And her life story, I'm very excited about the opportunity to tell that story.
Oh, that is wonderful. Good luck with that. Oh,
Thank you.
Seriously. Well, again, you have been such a delight. Your book, I cannot wait to read the rest of the book. I'm totally enthralled to get into that. I love the 20s. I have a lot of 20s style clothing myself that I love to wear. I love that time period, that the fact that you've merged bridge over two time periods. I like it very much. So I'm going to read a couple of these wonderful reviews or comments by about it's advanced praise is what it is for Wild Women in the Blues. Everyone remembers the name of that book, and go to Amazon because it's already there. You can see this marvelous cover, and you can get in on buying it. But here's one of the reviews: an ambitious and stunning debut. A sparkling cocktail of evocative detail, world-wise characters, and heartfelt prose. Celebrates the glam, danger, and promise of Chicago during the Jazz Age. giving readers an intimate, multi-generational story, and that is by Stephanie Dray, who is also a New York Times best-selling author. And we'll read one more. This is by Susanna Kersley, also a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author. Here's what Susanna had to say. You're in a master's hands, leading you through the emotional and sometimes dangerous steps linking present and past in this intricate, bold, unforgettable dance. Beautiful, beautiful advanced reviews.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thanks, Pam.
Thank you for being my guest today here. And to my listeners, I do want to encourage you to go find Denny S. Bryce, Bryce, on Amazon. And you can Google her and find out a whole bunch of stuff about what she has done, is doing. Thanks again, Denny. And my listeners, you know what to do. You can find these podcasts, as always, on many platforms, including Spotify, Pandora, iTunes. Too many to name. Gary pushes them out, but they're always, always available on NorthPalmBeachLife.com. Be sure to look up her page that will be out there after this podcast drops, which will be next week. Will be next week from where I'm talking about. You're going to be listening to this when it drops, so forget what I just said. Do go when this podcast is available to NorthPalmBeachLife.com, because Denny S. Bryce will have a page on there, as well as YouTube. You can see photos of this beautiful woman that I'm talking to today. It has been a wonderful, fun podcast. I appreciate all my listeners for letting me hear from you at Gigi. That's me in the 561. Stay tuned.